Hey everyone, it's Craig Campbell from Pastor Craig's Vintage Cards, and it has been a long time since I've done a story behind the cardboard episode of my early 1960s Topps baseball players. And today we're looking at George Crowe, his 1961 Topps card. Not a bad looking card, and very typical of the 61s, off-centered left to right, but the color's pretty darn sharp on this one here. Nice looking card. This is George's last baseball card ever issued. George Crowe with the Cardinals. And you can see he was born in 1923. And what a life George lived. What a life. And we are going to get into a lot of stories behind the cardboard of Mr. George Crowe. Since he played for the Milwaukee Braves, the Braves had a lot of issues of cards, and this is a 1953 Johnston's Cookies George Crowe card, and these are really cool cards if I get it turned the right way here. You can see I just got this from Greg Morris recently, but George Crowe with the Milwaukee Braves. What a story we have for George. I'm gonna have to wind this together because there's a lot about George, a lot of stories behind the cardboard. First of all, his rookie card, if you're curious, is a 1952 Topps. And not only is it a 52 Topps, but it happens to be a high number card, number 360. So if you're looking for a George Crowe rookie card, you better be ready to pay up, because those high numbers in the 52 Topps are expensive. He also had a card issued in 53, and then he had cards issued between 56 until 1961, this being his last card. So where do we start with George? Well, he was the fifth of 10 children, and he grew up 20 miles south of Indianapolis on a farm. And as a matter of fact, his oldest brother, George's oldest brother, was the high school basketball coach of one Mr. Oscar Robertson. You may have heard of him, a Hall of Fame basketball player, the great Big O. But not only that, George himself was the very first Mr. Basketball in the state of Indiana in 1939. So when George was 16 years old, he was named Mr. Basketball in the state of Indiana, the very first Mr. Basketball ever named in the state of Indiana. So George, he was a very athletic player, and he did go to college, but then he got drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II, and he was a lieutenant because he was a college guy. So George was a lieutenant, but get this, he spent a year in Asia hauling supplies from India to China by truck. It took 28 days to go from India to China via truck, and only 3 hours to fly back from China to India. Now, if you look at the maps of that area, I'm not a geography guy, but I do know that that area is extremely rugged, extremely mountainous. And what an experience that must have been. 28 days to haul supplies via truck, 3 hours to fly back. I could only imagine the hazards that were faced every single day of that 28-day journey, hauling supplies for a year. So George, thank you for your service to this country, and a hard service it must have been. So George was a very athletic player, and he started out with the Negro Lg, and he made his debut in 1947 playing for the New York Black Yankees, and they played their games at Yankee Stadium. In 1947, he hit .305 with 141 at-bats. And then in 1948, he hit .338, and he played in the All-Star game against the Negro American League players at Yankee Stadium. As the Negro League started to disband, the owner of the Newark, not New York, but Newark, New Jersey Negro League team, he recommended George to the Boston Braves, and they signed him to a spring tryout. George was 28 years old when he started playing Major League Baseball. From 1950 He had 353 in 1950, excuse me, with 43 doubles and 24 home runs. He was the MVP in the minor leagues his second year. In 1949 was his first year. In 1950, his second year in the minors, he was named the MVP. In 1951, Earl Torgerson, who would become a major league player and have a decent career, he had hit 24 home runs for the Milwaukee Braves, and that was blocking George Crowe from advancing to the major leagues. And Crowe was hitting 258, and Torgerson was hitting 200 when George Crowe was sent to AAA. And you can only imagine how that made George feel. He was clearly the better player, but he was sent to AAA while Earl was called up to the major leagues. The Braves then traded Earl Torgerson for Joe Adcock, and Joe Adcock went on to have a great career with the Braves. And the story of George Crowe's career, he was not an everyday starter. They didn't think he was an everyday player, so he stayed in the minor leagues. He finally did get his major league breakthrough in 1952 when he appeared in 73 games for the Boston Braves. He made his major league debut on April 16th of 1952. But then he was sent back to the minor leagues again. In 1954, he played 154 games for AAA Toledo. Again, he had 34 home runs. He led the league in hits, RBIs, doubles, and total bases. But he just could not crack through into the major leagues yet. In 1955, Adcock broke his arm, and then George got called up to the major leagues, and he managed to hit 281 with 15 home runs and 354 plate appearances. So he got a pretty good look. In 1956, he was traded to the Cincinnati Reds. In Cincinnati, when George made his very first appearance, he was booed horrendously in his first game. But then his second game in front of the hometown Reds fans, he ended up hitting 2 home runs and a triple. Not too bad. That's a way to shut up the boo birds. In 1957, it was his best season ever. He hit 271 with 31 home runs, all while playing with a bad knee the last 6 weeks of the season. In 1959, the Reds traded George to the Cardinals, and he played a little bit for the Cardinals, and he was a very important figure for a couple of really big names when George got traded to the Cardinals. All of the Negro players called George Big Daddy. He was older than them. He was a big person. He'd been around the world. He was a World War II veteran. He'd been up and down. He'd played in minor league baseball, major league baseball. He'd seen a lot of the world. Not only that, but George was also a professional basketball player. He played for the Dayton Wrens, the New York Harlem Yankees, and the Glen Falls Saratoga teams. So he played baseball and basketball there in the early 50s. He was a very good basketball player. So as he gets traded to the Cardinals, there is a young Bob Gibson, Vada Pinson. They were great admirers of George, and they called him Big Daddy. And really, all the black players in Major League Baseball, they just referred to George as Big Daddy. And especially if you were a younger player looking for direction, trying to navigate this really weird world, being thrust into Major League Baseball and the racism that was present. And it was just a hard road to navigate for a lot of young players. And George was the person that really helped them out. And so he was affectionately called Big Daddy by so many of baseball's players. With St. Louis, it was very apparent that his career was coming to an end. The injuries started to rack up. He had knee problems that just would not go away. And so George retired, was cut actually during the 1961 season, and then retired. And this is where the story gets kind of weird. In 1971, 10 years after George's retirement, he just dropped out of society. I mean, he literally dropped out of society. He moved to the Catskill Mountains in New York, and he lived in a log cabin that was called the Jackass Inn. It was 7 miles from any paved road. There was no heat, no electricity, there was no running water. George lived there for more than 30 years in a little log cabin that he called the Jackass Inn. At the age of 80, his daughter finally persuaded George to leave this cabin and to come and move with her. And he lived in California with his daughter. And then George died just 2 months shy of his 90th birthday. George dropped out of society. He had served this country. He played a very, very important role in Major League Baseball. He had accolades from his youth. He was an educated man. But he just snapped and dropped out of society in 1971. When I say snapped, it wasn't like he was a bad person. He just said, the hell with this world. And he moved to that cabin, and he just loved living there all by himself with no amenities, away from everything. And there were reports, that some reporters would go and talk to him, and he would talk about his baseball life. And what a great story. George Crowe, Big Daddy, was Mr. Basketball of the state of Indiana, served in the U.S. Army driving trucks from India to China, 28 days through the mountains, comes back, plays in the Negro Leagues, has great success, plays early professional basketball, has great success. Negro Leagues disband, he has great success in the minor leagues. He's held down while performing great in AAA year after year after year, while lesser players were allowed to play in the majors. But he finally got his chance. He had that one great season in 1957 with 30 home runs. But that's the story behind the cardboard of George Crowe, a fascinating player. There's so many more resources you can read about George on the internet if you go to the Society of American Baseball Research, or even look at his Wikipedia page. George Crowe is an American treasure, and I salute him for his service. I thank him for his desire to be Big Daddy to so many young players coming up in a very difficult time. And I'd really like to know more about his time spent almost 30 years at Jackass Inn with no heat, no electricity, no running water in the Catskill Mountains of New York. What a story behind the cardboard. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a comment, like and subscribe. It does encourage me to see that people do like these stories, and I enjoy doing the research. I love the stories of players like this. These are guys that not only make baseball what it is, but George is really somebody that makes America what it is. And especially as we're coming into this is our 250th year, and I just salute Mr. Crowe and thank him for his service. And this is the story behind the cardboard, guys. Take care.